This is radiocarpal joint play. Stabilizing distal form, grasping the proximal row of carpal bones, applying a palmar force, a dorsal force, radial, and ulnar. Positive test is pain, increase of gliding or decrease of gliding compared to the other side. Implications are sprains of the collateral or carpal, radial, and ulnar carpal ligaments, and decreased gliding is an implication of adhesions. This is mid-carpal joint play. Stabilizing the proximal row and the distal row of carpal bones, applying a palmar force, dorsal force, radial force, ulnar force. Positive test is an increase or decrease of gliding and pain. Increase of gliding and pain indicates sprain of the mid-carpal ligaments, and decrease in gliding indicates adhesions. This is intercarpal joint play. I'll be performing it on the scaphoid and lunate bones. Just gliding the bones next to each other, applying a shear force. I perform this test on all the carpal bones. Positive test is an increase of gliding or a decrease of gliding in pain. Increased gliding indicates a sprain of the intercarpal ligaments, and a decrease of gliding indicates adhesions. This is the valgus and varus stress test at the wrist. Stabilizing the distal forearm. First applying a valgus force, and then applying a varus force. Positive test is increase in laxity and pain or a decrease in movement. Positive test for the valgus stress test is sprain of the UCL ligaments or adhesions, and a positive test for the varus stress test is a sprain of the RCL ligament or adhesions. This is the valgus varus stress test of the PIP and DIP joints. First for the PIP, stabilizing the most proximal phalanx and the middle phalanx, applying a valgus force and a varus force, and then also doing it for the DIP, stabilizing the middle phalanx and distal phalanx, applying a valgus varus force. Positive test for both is an increase in laxity or pain, and that implications are an avulsion fracture or a sprain of the collateral ligaments. This is the first MCP stress test. First, we're going to position them into the extension abduction, apply that valgus force, and then we're going to put them into flexion, apply that same valgus force. Positive test is a increase in pain or laxity. Implications in extension is a sprain to the accessory ligament, and in flexion it is sprain to the UCL ligament or an avulsion fracture. This is Watson's test. Stabilizing the scaphoid, starting them in an ulnar deviation and moving them into radial deviation. A positive test for this is reproduction of symptoms or a noticeable pop as you move them through the motion, and the implication is scapholunate dissociation. This is Phelan's test. Starting with their shoulder flexed, internally rotated, and their elbow flexed. Stabilizing the elbow and passively flexing the wrist. Holding that for 1 minute and comparing bilaterally. A positive test is tingling or an increase in tingling, and the implications is median nerve compression. This is Finkelstein's test. Positioning the patient in shoulder flexion, elbow extended, ask them to grasp their thumb within their fingers, and asking them to actively ulnarly deviate. Positive test is pain over the radial styloid process, the EVP or APL tendons, and this is indicating de Quervain's syndrome. This is the scaphoid compression test. Stabilizing the wrist and applying an axial load down on the first metacarpal. Positive test is pain, and the implication is a scaphoid fracture. This is the supination lift test. Stabilizing the wrist, applying a resistance on the ulnar side. Resist. Positive test is pain over the wrist in the TFCC area, and implication is a tear to the TFCC. This is the TFCC load or compression test. Starting the patient in this position, starting them slightly radially deviated, stabilizing the wrist, move them into ulnar deviation, and apply an axial load down that fifth metacarpal. Positive test is pain at that TFCC area, and implication is a TFCC tear.